G. Clayton Reeves thought he was just bringing his son home, but the woman bleeding out in the dust was about to unravel everything he believed about his wife's death, a death he'd accepted for 3 agonizing years. The Arizona sun was merciless that October afternoon in 1882, a blinding hammer beating down on the dusty trail as Clayton's wagon creaked homeward. 3-year-old Tommy sat beside him, his small hands gripping a wooden horse his father had carved during their 3-day trip to Tucson. The boy's innocent laughter filled the stark desert air, a sound that still resonated with a fragile joy within Clayton, a joy he'd almost forgotten after 3 years of raising him alone. Clayton's weathered hands gripped the reins tighter, the leather worn smooth with use and worry. Familiar landmarks rose into view, the distinctive formation of red rocks he'd known since childhood, the gnarled and twisted mesquite tree that marked the final stretch home. Home. Almost back to the small, sun-baked house where memories of his beloved wife Sarah still clung to every corner like stubborn shadows, where her worn Bible sat untouched on the kitchen table, its pages filled with her elegant script, where her favorite shawl still hung expectantly by the door. But today, something was terribly wrong. A figure lay crumpled and still beside the trail ahead, dark hair spread across the bleached sand like spilled ink. Clayton's heart lurched in his chest as he recognized the shape of a woman, her pale blue dress torn and stained with a horrifying crimson. Beside her, nestled almost invisibly in the scant shadow of a boulder, something small moved. Tommy stopped playing instantly. The wooden horse fell from his tiny hands, landing silently in the dust. Clayton pulled the wagon to a screeching halt, the sudden stop sending a jolt through his weary body. He jumped down, his boots hitting the ground hard, kicking up a small cloud of red dust. The woman's eyelids fluttered weakly as he knelt beside her, her face pale and drawn, revealing the most startling, vibrant green eyes he'd ever seen, eyes that now held a desperate, fading light. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth, a thin red line against her pale skin, and her breathing came in short, desperate gasps, each one a struggle. Next to her, wrapped in a torn and bloodied piece of cloth, a newborn baby whimpered softly, its cries barely audible above the desert wind. The woman's fingers clutched at Clayton's shirt with surprising strength, her grip surprisingly strong despite her weakened state. Her lips moved, forming silent words, but no sound came out at first. Clayton leaned closer, close enough to smell the metallic scent of blood and something else, something floral and strangely familiar, something that reminded him of the medicinal herb Sarah used to cultivate in their small garden. Finally, words emerged from the woman's lips, barely a whisper carried on a ragged breath. "Sarah Reeves." Clayton's blood turned to ice water in his veins. His dead wife's name spoken by a dying stranger in the middle of nowhere. The woman's grip tightened agonizingly on his shirt, her startling green eyes boring into his with desperate intensity, pleading for something he didn't yet understand. But before Clayton could ask how she knew Sarah's name, before he could make sense of the impossible, the woman's next words shattered his carefully constructed world. "She didn't die from..." Her breathing hitched, stopped abruptly, her fingers went limp, and Clayton Reeves was left kneeling in the unforgiving dust with more devastating questions than answers. A crying baby beside a dead woman who somehow held the key to the truth about what really killed his wife. Clayton stared blankly at the dead woman's face, his mind reeling, struggling to process the impossible words he had just heard. Sarah didn't die from... what? From childbirth, as Doc Henderson had solemnly declared, the official story that had haunted him, gnawed at him, for 3 long years. The accepted narrative, the explanation he'd clung to for sanity's sake, suddenly felt like a carefully constructed lie, a fabrication wrapped in the authority of a trusted medical professional. The baby's cries grew louder, more insistent, cutting through his shock and confusion like a jagged knife. Clayton looked down at the tiny, fragile face, red and wrinkled, no more than hours old. How had this woman gotten here? Where had she come from? And why, oh why, did she know Sarah's name? Tommy's innocent voice broke through his father's spiral of dark thoughts. "Papa, is the lady sleeping?" Clayton turned slowly to see his son standing hesitantly at the edge of the wagon, the wooden horse clutched tightly in his small fist, those same clear blue eyes that Sarah had given him wide with an innocent curiosity about death he couldn't yet comprehend. A curiosity that tore at Clayton's heart. "Yes, son, she's sleeping." The comforting lie tasted bitter, like ash in Clayton's mouth, but 3-year-olds didn't need to know about the brutal reality of blood soaking into the desert sand, the permanent mark left by violence. Clayton's hands trembled visibly as he reached gingerly for the baby. The moment his fingers touched the tiny, fragile body, something deep inside him cracked open, releasing a flood of raw emotion. This child was alive, breathing, needing help, just like Tommy had been 3 years ago when But Sarah hadn't just died from childbirth. This woman's final, desperate words were undeniable proof. The baby quieted slightly in Clayton's arms, sensing his touch, and he noticed something else. Pinned securely to the torn cloth was a small, folded piece of paper secured with a rusty pin. Clayton's heart hammered against his ribs as he carefully unfolded it with one hand, being extra careful not to disturb the fragile infant. 3 words were scrolled shakily across the paper in hurried, uneven handwriting. "Find Dr. Henderson." Clayton's breath caught sharply in his throat, the air suddenly thick and unbreathable. Doc Henderson, the same man who had delivered Tommy into the world, the same man who had solemnly pronounced Sarah dead, the same man who had looked Clayton squarely in the eye and sworn that complications in childbirth were simply God's will, a tragic but natural occurrence. But if this dying woman, with her last breath, wanted him to find Doc Henderson, it meant the doctor was intrinsically involved in whatever dark truth surrounded Sarah's death. And if Doc Henderson had lied about Sarah's death, a new, unsettling sound reached Clayton's ears. The distinct sound of hoofbeats coming fast from the direction of town, growing louder with each passing second. Clayton looked up, shielding his eyes from the harsh sun, to see 3 riders approaching rapidly, dust clouds swirling wildly behind their galloping horses. Even from a distance, he could make out the glint of sheriff's badges, reflecting the harsh sunlight. They were riding hard with a focused determination, like men chasing something or someone, a desperate hunt. The baby in his arms began to cry again, its tiny cries mirroring the frantic beat of his own heart, as if sensing the imminent danger. Tommy stepped closer to his father, suddenly and visibly afraid, his small hand seeking reassurance. Clayton's mind raced frantically. A dead woman who knew his wife's name and hinted at foul play, a cryptic note directing him to the doctor who had delivered his son and pronounced his wife dead, and now lawmen approaching at full gallop, their intentions unknown. Whatever Sarah had really died from, someone was clearly willing to kill to keep it secret, to bury the truth. And somehow, Clayton was now unwittingly holding the tangible evidence in his arms, a fragile, defenseless infant. The 3 riders pulled their horses to a skidding halt in a choking cloud of dust, their badges catching the harsh desert sun, glinting ominously. Sheriff Mackenzie's weathered face was grim as he dismounted, his hand resting heavily on his gun belt, a silent but clear warning. Clayton had known Ben Mackenzie for years, had shared drinks with him at the local saloon, had considered him a friend, had trusted him implicitly. But the cold, hard look in the sheriff's eyes now was anything but friendly, radiating a hostility that sent a shiver down Clayton's spine. "Clayton Reeves!" Mackenzie called out, his voice carrying a sharp, commanding edge Clayton had never heard before, a tone that brooked no argument. "Step away from that baby." Clayton's arms instinctively tightened protectively around the infant, shielding it from the perceived threat. "Sheriff, this woman, she's dead. I just found her here by the trail with this child. I don't know what happened." I said, "Step away." Mackenzie's hand moved subtly, almost imperceptibly closer to his gun, his knuckles white against the worn leather of the holster. The 2 deputies flanked him, their faces hard as stone, their eyes narrowed, assessing him with unsettling intensity. Tommy whimpered softly and pressed tightly against his father's leg, burying his face in Clayton's trousers. Clayton could feel his son's small body trembling against him, radiating fear. This wasn't right. None of this was right. The situation was spiraling out of control. "Ben, what's going on here?" Clayton tried desperately to keep his voice steady, to project an air of calm he didn't feel, but his heart was pounding in his chest like a trapped bird. This woman knew my Sarah. She said her name before she died. She said, Sheriff Mackenzie's jaw tightened, his lips forming a hard, unwavering line. That woman was a thief and a murderer, Reeves, and that baby she's carrying belongs to someone very important, someone who desperately wants it back. We're here to retrieve the child. Clayton looked down at the dead woman's peaceful face, now still and serene in death. A thief and a murderer? The woman who had whispered his wife's name with her dying breath? The woman who had desperately tried to tell him something? That's impossible, Ben. She was dying when I found her. She couldn't have hurt anyone in that condition. You calling me a liar, Clayton? Mackenzie's voice was dangerously low, his eyes narrowed into slits. The baby stirred restlessly in Clayton's arms, tiny fingers grasping at the air, searching for something to hold on to. Such a small, innocent thing. How could anyone possibly want to harm something so helpless? I'm not calling you anything, Ben, Clayton said carefully, choosing his words with deliberate precision, knowing that one wrong move could escalate the already volatile situation. But I'm not handing over a baby to men who won't tell me why they want it, who won't explain what's going on here. Deputy Wells, a young man Clayton barely knew, a fresh face in town, stepped forward nervously. Sir, we have direct orders to bring that child back unharmed. Don't make this any harder than it needs to be, Mr. Reeves. Orders from whom, Deputy? Clayton's mind raced back to the cryptic note pinned to the baby's blanket. Find Dr. Henderson, the same doctor who had lied about Sarah's death, the same doctor who was somehow inextricably connected to this dead woman and her final desperate words. What if I refuse, Sheriff? Clayton asked, his voice barely above a whisper, but filled with a quiet determination. Sheriff Mackenzie's hand finally closed firmly around his gun handle, the click of the hammer a sharp, ominous sound in the still desert air. Then you'll be interfering with an official investigation, Clayton, and I'll be forced to arrest you and potentially use force if necessary. Tommy looked up at his father with those trusting, innocent blue eyes, the same eyes Sarah had given him before she died, before she was murdered. Because Clayton was now agonizingly certain that that's what had happened, that Sarah had not simply succumbed to childbirth complications. She'd been deliberately killed, silenced, just like this woman bleeding out in the sand. The baby in his arms represented the truth, the devastating truth about what had really happened to his wife, the truth that someone was desperate to bury, to conceal at all costs. Clayton's decision coalesced in his mind, solidifying like cold, hard steel. Then I guess you'll have to shoot me, Ben, he said, his voice surprisingly steady despite the terror clawing at his heart. Because I'm not giving you this baby until someone tells me what really happened to my wife, until I get some answers. The silence stretched between Clayton and the three lawmen, thick and heavy like a taut rope about to snap. Sheriff Mackenzie's gun remained in its holster, but his knuckles were bone white against the leather grip, betraying the internal conflict raging within him. The baby's soft, innocent breathing was the only sound cutting through the desert tension, a fragile counterpoint to the mounting threat. You're making a big mistake, Clayton, Mackenzie said, his voice low and dangerous, laced with a warning. A bigger mistake than you can possibly imagine. The only mistake I made, Ben, was trusting people in this town for 3 years. Clayton's voice grew stronger, infused with a righteous anger that surprised even himself. Trusting that my wife died naturally, trusting that good men wear badges and uphold the law. Deputy Wells shifted nervously, looking from Clayton to the sheriff and back again, his young face etched with indecision. Sir, maybe we should... Shut up, Wells. Mackenzie's eyes never left Clayton's face, his gaze unwavering, intense. You don't understand what you're getting into, Reeves. This isn't just about your wife. This is about something much bigger, something you can't comprehend. But Clayton had stopped listening. His focus narrowed completely. As he looked down at the baby cradled securely in his arms, he noticed something that made his blood run cold, something that sent a jolt of shock through his entire being. A small, distinct birthmark on the infant's tiny wrist, heart-shaped, identical in every way to the one Sarah had carried her entire life. The world tilted on its axis. The ground seemed to shift beneath his feet. This wasn't just any baby. This wasn't just any dying woman who happened to know Sarah's name. This baby was family, connected to Sarah in a way he couldn't yet fathom. Clayton's mind raced. struggling to process the implications, the ramifications of this impossible discovery. Sarah had been an only child, or so she'd always told him. Her parents had died when she was young, leaving her alone in the world. No siblings, no cousins, no living relatives. That's what she'd always said, the story she'd always told. But here was a baby with Sarah's unmistakable birthmark, found with a woman who knew Sarah's name and had desperately tried to tell him something about how his wife really died. "This baby," Clayton whispered, his voice hoarse with disbelief, staring transfixed at the tiny, heart-shaped mark. "She's related to Sarah. She has to be." Sheriff Mackenzie's face went ashen, paling beneath his weathered complexion. "Clayton, don't! She had a sister!" The pieces of the puzzle were suddenly falling into place, clicking together to form a horrifying picture Clayton had never imagined, a reality he couldn't escape. Sarah had a sister she'd kept hidden for some unknown reason, and someone had killed that sister to keep a dark secret buried. Tommy tugged urgently at his father's pants leg, his small voice filled with concern. "Papa, why are the men angry? Are they going to hurt us? If you were Clayton, what would you do? Trust the sheriff who's pointing a gun at you and your son, or protect this baby who might be the only family you have left? Tell me in the comments. I need to know which side you'd choose, because what Clayton decided next would determine whether he lived to learn the truth about Sarah's death, or if he would become another victim of the lies and deceit that had shrouded his life for so long." Deputy Wells stepped forward, his young face etched with conflict, his eyes reflecting the turmoil raging within him. "Sheriff, if what he's saying is true, if that baby is related to Sarah—" "It's not true!" Mackenzie's voice cracked like a whip, the sound echoing in the stillness. "Wells, you're new here. You don't know what you're talking about. Just follow orders." But the damage was done. Clayton could see doubt creeping into the deputy's eyes, eroding his unwavering loyalty, and if Wells was having second thoughts, it meant there was hope, a chance to break through the wall of silence and uncover the truth. Clayton looked at the dead woman one more time, memorizing her face, trying to see a resemblance to Sarah, searching for any clue that might unlock the mystery of her identity. Sarah's sister it had to be. The same dark hair, the same delicate bone structure, the same determined set to her jaw. How had Sarah hidden this? Why had she kept this a secret from him for so long? The baby stirred in his arms, whimpering softly, and Clayton made a silent promise to the tiny life he held, a vow etched in his soul. "I'm going to find out what happened to your mother, and to mine. I swear it." Sheriff Mackenzie slowly raised his gun, his hand trembling slightly. The gun barrel caught the desert sun, a cold, glinting circle of death pointed directly at Clayton's chest. Time seemed to slow to a crawl, stretching out each second as Sheriff Mackenzie's finger tightened imperceptibly on the trigger. Tommy pressed closer to his father's leg, sensing the danger even if he couldn't fully understand it, his small body rigid with fear. "Please, Ben," Clayton said, his voice surprisingly calm despite the terror clawing at his heart. "Whatever they're paying you, whatever they've threatened you with, it's not worth killing a man in front of his son. It's not worth throwing away everything you believe in." Something flickered deep within Mackenzie's eyes, a flicker of doubt, a hint of shame, a glimmer of the man Clayton had once known, but the gun didn't waver, remaining fixed on its target. "You think I want to do this, Clayton?" The sheriff's voice was barely above a whisper, filled with a weariness that resonated deep within Clayton's soul. "You think I've slept a single night in 3 years without seeing your wife's face, without hearing her voice in my dreams?" Clayton's breath caught in his throat. "You were there when Sarah died? You witnessed it? You knew? I was supposed to protect her, Clayton. That was my job, my duty." Mackenzie's hand began to shake visibly, the gun trembling in his grasp. "But Doc Henderson, he said it was the only way. Said if we didn't do it, more people would die. He convinced me it was for the greater good." Deputy Wells took a stunned step back, his face gone white with disbelief. "Sheriff, what are you talking about? What did you do?" But Clayton's attention was completely fixed on Mackenzie's halting, trembling confession, hanging onto every word, every revelation. "Do what, Ben? What did Henderson make you do? What was the greater good that required Sarah's death?" The baby began to cry more insistently, its cries mirroring the weight of the dark secrets about to be revealed, amplifying the tension in the air. Mackenzie flinched at the sound, and for a fleeting moment, his gun dipped slightly toward the ground, a flicker of humanity breaking through the hardened exterior. "Sarah found out about the adoption ring, Clayton," Mackenzie whispered, his voice barely audible, laced with shame and regret. Henderson was selling babies to wealthy families back east, preying on vulnerable women, telling them their children died in childbirth, then selling the infants for thousands of dollars. He was profiting from their grief and despair. Clayton's world shifted again, the foundations of his beliefs crumbling beneath him. Sarah hadn't been a passive victim. She'd been a warrior, a defender of the innocent, a hero fighting against a corrupt and powerful system. "She was going to expose everything, Clayton," Mackenzie continued, tears now streaming unchecked down his weathered cheeks, carving deep lines in his face. "She was going to tell everyone about the adoption ring, about the lies and the deceit. Henderson said if she talked, it would destroy half the families in town, ruin their reputations, expose their secrets. He convinced me it was for the greater good, that sacrificing one life would save many others." "So you killed her? You stood by and let him kill her?" Clayton's voice was a raw, ragged whisper filled with grief and disbelief. "Henderson did it, Clayton." Mackenzie's voice broke completely, dissolving into a sob. "He made it look like childbirth complications, a tragic but unavoidable accident. I just helped cover it up, suppress the truth. I've carried this guilt with me every day since." Deputy Wells stepped forward, his young voice shaking with righteous anger. "Sheriff, you're confessing to murder. You're admitting to covering up a heinous crime." Clayton looked down at the baby in his arms, Sarah's sister's child, a child that Henderson had probably planned to steal and sell, just like he'd been doing for years, just like he'd planned to do with Tommy before Sarah discovered the truth and intervened. "This woman, Rebecca," Clayton said, nodding slowly toward the lifeless body in the sand. "She found out too, didn't she? She was coming to warn me, to expose Henderson's crimes." Mackenzie nodded miserably, unable to meet Clayton's gaze. "Rebecca Hartwell, Sarah's younger sister. She'd been searching for Sarah for 3 years, ever since she disappeared from Denver, trying to reconnect. When she finally tracked her here and learned what had happened, Henderson killed her too, silenced her permanently. He hired men to do it, to prevent her from revealing the truth. But she got away at first, managed to escape. She made it this far before they caught up to her." Mackenzie's gun finally dropped to his side, landing with a soft thud in the dust. "That baby she's carrying, it's Rebecca's daughter, her only child. Henderson was planning to take her tonight, to add her to the list of stolen babies." Clayton felt a surge of protective fury unlike anything he'd ever experienced, a burning rage directed at Henderson and his web of lies and deceit. This tiny infant was his family, Tommy's cousin, the last living connection to Sarah he'd ever have. He would protect her at all costs. "Where is Henderson now, Ben? Where is he hiding?" Clayton's voice was deadly quiet, a low rumble of suppressed rage. "At his clinic, Clayton," Wells answered quickly before Mackenzie could speak, eager to distance himself from the sheriff's confession, "waiting for us to bring him the baby as planned." Clayton looked at his son, then at the baby, then at the 2 lawmen whose loyalties were now clearly divided. The choice before him was simple but terrifying. He could hand over the baby and walk away, keeping Tommy safe but allowing Henderson to continue his evil work, perpetuating the cycle of lies and deceit. Or he could fight for justice, expose Henderson's crimes and risk everything, potentially sacrificing his own life and Tommy's safety. But as he stared down at the heart-shaped birthmark on the baby's tiny wrist, a mirror image of Sarah's, Clayton realized the choice had already been made 3 years ago, when Sarah had decided to stand up to evil, to risk everything for the sake of the innocent. Now it was his turn to finish what his wife had started, to honor her memory by bringing Henderson to justice. Clayton's decision crystallized like ice in winter, his resolve hardening with each passing second. He looked at Deputy Wells, whose young face burned with righteous anger, then at Sheriff Mackenzie, broken and trembling with 3 years of accumulated guilt. "Ben, you're going to help me end this right now," Clayton said, his voice carrying the unwavering authority of a man who'd finally found his purpose. "Or Wells here is going to arrest you for murder and spend the rest of your life behind bars." Mackenzie's shoulders sagged in defeat, the fight draining out of him. "Henderson has men, Clayton, dangerous men, ruthless killers. If you go to that clinic, you might not come back. Then Tommy loses another parent and this baby loses her only chance. Clayton looked down at his son, who was still clutching the wooden horse, watching the adults with wide, confused eyes. But if I don't go, Ben, how many more babies will Henderson steal? How many more women will die? How many more families will be destroyed by his lies? Clayton gently placed the infant carefully into Wells's arms, entrusting him with the most precious cargo he could imagine. Deputy, I need you to take both children and ride directly to the church. Tell Pastor Williams everything you've heard today, everything that's happened. If I don't come back by sunset, you make sure everyone in town knows the truth about Doc Henderson, expose his crimes to the light. Let the community decide what to do. Wells nodded solemnly, understanding the immense weight of responsibility being placed on his young shoulders, his face etched with determination. Clayton turned to Mackenzie, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and desperate hope. You're coming with me, Ben. You owe Sarah that much. This is your chance to make amends, to atone for your silence. The broken sheriff nodded slowly, holstering his gun with trembling hands, his face a mask of grim resignation. Clayton knelt down to Tommy's level, his heart breaking at the innocence reflected in his son's blue eyes. Papa has to go help some people, little man. You're going to stay with Deputy Wells and the baby for a while, okay? Be brave. Are you coming back, Papa? Will I see you again? The simple question hit Clayton like a physical blow, a punch to the gut. Sarah had never gotten the chance to say goodbye to Tommy, never gotten to see him grow up, to witness his milestones. And now Clayton might be making the same agonizing choice she had, sacrificing everything for what was right, for the sake of justice. I'm going to try my best, son. I promise you that. Clayton pulled the wooden horse gently from Tommy's small hands and pressed it back firmly into his palm, their fingers brushing. You keep this safe, okay? And you remember always that your mama and papa loved you more than anything in this world. Tommy's lower lip trembled, but he nodded bravely, clutching the wooden horse tightly to his chest. Clayton stood slowly and climbed onto his wagon, Mackenzie mounting his horse beside him, his face a mask of grim determination. As they started toward town, Clayton could hear the baby crying softly behind them, a sound that echoed in his ears, a constant reminder of the innocent life he was fighting to protect, a sound that reminded him of Tommy's first cries 3 years ago when Sarah had been murdered. The clinic came into view as they crested the hill, a modest building that had brought life into the world for decades, now revealed as a place of death and corruption, a den of lies and deceit. Smoke drifted lazily from the chimney, suggesting Henderson was inside, probably tending to his dark business, preparing for another night of stealing innocence, of tearing families apart. He keeps records, Clayton, Mackenzie said quietly as they approached, his voice barely audible above the creaking of the wagon wheels. Detailed names, precise dates, the wealthy families who bought the babies, everything. He keeps it all hidden in a safe behind the medicine cabinet. Sarah found it that night, the night she... Mackenzie couldn't bring himself to finish the sentence. The pain too raw, the guilt too overwhelming. Clayton's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists. Then that's what we're going for, Ben. We're going to expose his crimes, bring his lies to light. But as they pulled up to the clinic, Clayton noticed something that made his blood run cold, sending a shiver of apprehension down his spine. 3 horses were tied out front, their reins looped around the wooden post, shifting restlessly in the dust. Henderson wasn't alone. He was expecting trouble. Clayton counted the horses again, his mind racing, assessing the threat. 3 plus Henderson inside, 4 men total, and Clayton only had a broken sheriff whose loyalty was questionable at best, a man burdened by guilt and shame. Who are they, Ben? Clayton whispered, nodding subtly toward the horses, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. Who is Henderson meeting with? Mackenzie's face had gone pale, his eyes wide with fear, reflecting the gravity of the situation. Henderson's men, Clayton, the ones who killed Rebecca. The ruthless killers he hired to silence her. The clinic's front door stood slightly ajar, and muffled voices drifted out into the still desert air, carried on the gentle breeze. Clayton could make out Henderson's cultured tone, the calm, reassuring voice that had delivered countless babies and pronounced countless deaths. the voice that had lied to his face about Sarah's passing, offering false comfort and concealing a dark secret. "What's taking so long to bring me that baby? Where is Mackenzie? I expected him hours ago," Henderson was saying, his voice laced with impatience. "Is Reeves giving him trouble? Is he suspicious?" A gruffer, less refined voice responded, "Maybe Reeves is putting up a fight, Doc. Maybe Mackenzie needs some help. You want us to ride out and check on them? Make sure everything is going according to plan?" Clayton's heart hammered against his ribs, his mind racing. If these men rode out now, they'd find Wells and the children at the church, exposing them to danger. Tommy would be in mortal peril. "We go in now, Ben," Clayton whispered urgently to Mackenzie, his eyes fixed on the open doorway. "Before they decide to leave, before they find Tommy." Mackenzie shook his head frantically, his eyes filled with terror. "Clayton, they'll kill us both. They're ruthless, heartless. These aren't lawmen, they're hired killers, men with nothing to lose. Then we die trying to get justice for Sarah." Clayton's voice was steel, cold and unwavering. "Unless you'd rather live with 3 more years of guilt, knowing you could have stopped him, but you chose to remain silent." Something in Mackenzie's eyes shifted. A flicker of defiance, a spark of the man he once was. The broken man straightened slightly, his shoulders squaring, and he reached for his gun with steadier hands, his grip firm and resolute. "Sarah was a good woman, Clayton. She deserved better than what we gave her, than what I allowed to happen." Clayton nodded grimly, checking his own pistol, ensuring it was loaded and ready. "She deserved the truth, Ben, and so does every family in this town who's been lied to, manipulated, and robbed of their children." They approached the clinic's front door cautiously, each step bringing them closer to a potentially deadly confrontation that would end either in justice or in death. Clayton thought of Tommy's innocent face, of the baby girl with Sarah's birthmark, of all the families destroyed by Henderson's greed, their lives shattered by his lies. Through the narrow crack in the door, Clayton could see Henderson's profile, framed by the dim lamplight within the clinic. Tall, distinguished, with silver hair neatly combed and steady hands, the hands that had delivered Tommy into the world, the hands that had coldly and deliberately killed Sarah. "Reeves is becoming a problem, a loose end that needs to be dealt with," Henderson was saying to his men, his voice betraying a hint of concern. "If Mackenzie can't handle him, we might need to handle the whole family, permanently." The whole family. They were planning to kill Tommy too, to eliminate any potential threat, to bury the truth forever. Clayton's vision went red with rage, his heart pounding with a primal fury. Every instinct screamed at him to burst through that door and put a bullet in Henderson's black heart, but he forced himself to remain calm, to think strategically. Sarah had been smart, resourceful. She'd gathered evidence, planned her moves carefully. He needed to do the same. He could hear Henderson moving around inside the clinic, the sound of papers rustling, the clinking of glass bottles, the everyday sounds of a doctor's office, masking the sinister reality hidden beneath the surface. The records Mackenzie had mentioned, proof of every stolen baby, every murdered mother, every family torn apart by Henderson's greed and corruption. They were within reach. "Boss," one of the men said, his voice rough and wary, "what if Reeves already knows, Doc? What if that woman Rebecca told him something before she died? What if he's on to us?" Henderson's laugh was cold and chilling, like the sound of winter wind. "Rebecca Hartwell was shot in the lung. She barely had enough breath to scream, let alone speak coherently or reveal my secrets. And even if she did manage to say something, who would believe Reeves? He's just a grieving widower, blinded by rage and sorrow. My word against his? I've been this town's doctor for 20 years. The community trusts me. They respect me. My reputation is impeccable." Clayton gripped his gun tighter, his knuckles white against the cold steel. Henderson was right. Without concrete proof, it would be Clayton's word against a respected doctor's, a battle he was likely to lose. The town would likely dismiss his accusations as the ravings of a man driven mad by grief. But with those records, with undeniable evidence in hand, "We're going for the safe, Ben," Clayton whispered to Mackenzie, his voice barely audible. "You create a distraction at the front door, draw their attention. I'll go around back and try to slip inside unnoticed. We need those records." Mackenzie nodded slowly, his face etched with grim determination, and for the first time in 3 long years, he looked like the lawman Clayton had once admired. a man of integrity and courage. As Clayton crept silently toward the back of the building, his boots muffled by the soft earth, he heard Henderson's voice one more time, his words sending a jolt of fear through his heart. After tonight, this whole mess disappears, permanently. The baby, the records, everything. And that includes Clayton Reeves and his boy Tommy. They can't be allowed to live, to expose our operation. Clayton's hand found the back door handle, his fingers closing around the cold metal grip. Time to finish what Sarah had started, to bring Henderson's reign of terror to an end. The back door opened silently under Clayton's touch, the hinges carefully oiled to prevent any telltale squeaks. He slipped inside, his boots making no sound on the worn wooden floor. As voices continued to drift from the front room, drawing Henderson's attention, the familiar smells of the clinic hit him immediately. Medicinal alcohol mixed with something else, something subtly sweet and floral, something that reminded him of the night Tommy was born, when Sarah had... Clayton pushed the painful memory away, focusing on the task at hand. The medicine cabinet was against the far wall, exactly where Mackenzie had said it would be, its shelves lined with bottles and jars of various potions and remedies. Behind it, concealed from view, was the safe that held the irrefutable evidence of Henderson's crimes, the key to unlocking the truth. From the front room, he could hear Mackenzie's voice, raised slightly, a deliberate attempt to create a diversion. "Doc, we got a problem with Reeves, a big problem." "What kind of problem, Mackenzie?" Henderson's tone was sharp and suspicious, his relaxed demeanor instantly vanishing. "Is he causing trouble? Did he figure something out?" "He's asking questions about his wife, Doc. He's digging around trying to uncover the past. Says the woman who died today, Rebecca, told him something before she passed, something that made him suspicious. He's not buying the story about childbirth complications." Clayton used the distraction to move swiftly and silently closer to the cabinet, his heart pounding with each step. His fingers found the edge of the heavy cabinet, and he carefully pulled it away from the wall, straining against the weight. There, set into the wood, partially concealed by the cabinet, was a small, old-fashioned iron safe, its metal surface cold and unyielding. "What exactly did she tell him, Mackenzie?" Henderson's voice was getting closer, his suspicion growing. Clayton could hear the distinct sound of footsteps moving toward the back room, the pace quickening. "Says she mentioned something about Sarah not dying from childbirth, that there was something else involved." The footsteps stopped abruptly just outside the doorway. "That's impossible, Mackenzie. Rebecca was shot in the lung. She barely had enough breath to scream, let alone articulate a coherent sentence or reveal any secrets. You're letting your guilt get the better of you." Clayton's heart pounded in his chest like a drum as he worked frantically at the safe's combination, his fingers fumbling with the numbers, his mind racing. Clayton's fingers finally found the right combination. Just as Henderson reached the door, the safe clicked open. Inside were ledgers, documents, and photographs. The damning proof of Henderson's crimes, the validation of Sarah's sacrifice, and the key to ensuring justice for countless families. He emerged from the clinic ready to face his destiny, determined to bring light to the darkness that had consumed his life. And there we leave Clayton, standing at the precipice of truth and justice, armed with the evidence he so desperately sought. His journey is a powerful reminder that even in the face of unimaginable loss and betrayal, courage and determination can pave the way for truth to prevail. It highlights the strength of family bonds, even those newly discovered, and the importance of standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. What would you have done in Clayton's shoes? Leave a comment below and let me know which side you would choose. And if you have questions or opinions, be sure to leave a comment as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Clayton's impossible situation. And if you enjoyed this dramatic tale, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on more gripping stories and intriguing mysteries. We've got plenty more adventures on the horizon.